Las Vegas was loud that night, the way it always was when money and power shared the same room. Cigarette smoke hung low beneath the ceiling lights, thick enough to blur faces and soften edges. Laughter echoed from every corner, mixed with the clink of glasses and the low murmur of deals being made without paperwork. This wasn't a club for tourists. This was where business happened when nobody wanted witnesses. Dean Martin didn't belong to this room. Not because he wasn't famous enough, not because he wasn't welcome, but because this room operated on rules Dean had never agreed to follow. He stood near the bar, jacket unbuttoned, posture loose, as if the night had no weight at all. To anyone watching casually, he looked exactly the way America knew him, cool, unbothered, relaxed to the point of indifference. But the people who mattered in that room weren't watching casually. They were watching carefully. At the center table sat men whose names were never spoken above a whisper. Men whose authority didn't come from titles or headlines, but from quiet understanding. When they spoke, things happened. When they stopped speaking, things disappeared. One of them leaned back in his chair and said, almost lazily, "Dean Martin." The effect was immediate. The room didn't stop outright, but it thinned. Conversations slowed, a laugh cut off halfway through. A dealer's hands froze above the table. Even the bartender felt his shoulders tensing, as if someone had dimmed the lights without touching a switch. Dean turned toward the voice. He didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't look surprised. He walked over like a man answering a friend who'd called him by name. "Come sit with us," the man said, smiling faintly. It wasn't an invitation. Dean knew that. So did everyone else. Dean pulled out a chair and sat. For a moment, nobody spoke. That silence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate, designed to remind people who controlled the pace of the room. Dean waited without filling it, his hands resting loosely on the table. "You've been doing well," the man said finally. "Movies, records. Vegas loves you." Dean nodded politely. "I've been lucky." The man smiled.
"Luck helps. But this town runs on something else." Dean didn't respond. "Protection," the man continued. "That's how things stay smooth here." The word lingered, heavy and familiar to everyone listening. Protection meant favors. It meant obligations. It meant that success wasn't free. It was rented. "You benefit from this town," the man said.
"From people who keep things running quietly." Dean took a slow breath, then met the man's eyes. "I do my shows," he said calmly. "I treat people right. I leave when I'm done." The man tapped ash into a tray. "That's not how it works for everyone." Dean smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'd been lucky again." A few men shifted in their chairs.
This wasn't hostility, but it wasn't compliance either. It was something more dangerous. The man leaned forward slightly. "You don't owe anyone," he said. "But showing appreciation goes a long way." Dean understood exactly what was being offered, and what it would cost. He picked up his glass, took a sip, and set it down carefully. "I appreciate the concern," Dean said, "but I don't need protection." The temperature in the room dropped. The man's smile didn't fade, but his eyes hardened. "Everyone needs protection," he said. Dean shrugged lightly. "Not from friends." That was the moment. That was when everyone realized this conversation wasn't going where it usually went. The man stared at Dean for a long beat. "Let me be clear," he said quietly.
"This isn't about friendship. It's about respect." Dean nodded. "Then, I'll be clear too." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lean in. He didn't posture. "I sing," Dean said. "I act. I show up on time. I do my job. I don't sell my name, and I don't borrow trouble." The man's fingers stopped tapping.
"And if someone thinks they own me because I work in this town," Dean continued, "they're mistaken." Silence pressed down on the table like a physical thing. "You know who you're talking to," the man said. Dean nodded once. "I do. And you're still comfortable saying no?" Dean didn't hesitate. "Yes." That single word landed heavier than any insult.
Someone nearby laughed nervously, then stopped when nobody joined in. The man leaned back slowly, studying Dean like he was trying to decide whether he was brave, foolish, or something else entirely. "You're confident," the man said. Dean shook his head. I'm settled. That answer unsettled the table more than defiance would have. Most men want more, the man said. Money, influence, guarantees. Dean smiled, small and honest. I already have what I need. The man watched him closely, then did something unexpected. He left, not loudly, not warmly, but genuinely. You're different, he said. Most guys fold before the offer is finished. Dean lifted his glass slightly. Most guys are negotiating. The man nodded slowly. Go enjoy your night, he said, waving a hand. We're done. Dean stood, adjusted his jacket, and walked away without looking back. Only after he reached the bar did the room start breathing again. But that wasn't the end of it, because in places like this, done never really means done. And Dean knew it. As he stood at the bar, the bartender slid him another drink without asking. His hands trembled just enough to notice. On the house, the bartender said quietly. Dean nodded. Thank you. Around him, conversations restarted, but cautiously. Eyes followed him. Whispers moved through the room like static. One question hung over everything. How far would that no go? 20 minutes later, the same man approached Dean again, alone this time. You got a minute? He asked. Dean didn't turn. I've got a minute. They stepped into a quieter corner. You understand, the man said, that refusing something like that usually comes with consequences. Dean nodded. I do, and you're prepared for that. Dean met his eyes. I grew up watching men owe favors, Dean said. I watched what it cost them. I'm not interested. The man studied him carefully. You're not afraid? Dean considered it honestly. I am, he said, just not enough to give my life away. The man stepped back, then gave a small nod. There's something dangerous about a man who isn't greedy, he said. Dean smiled faintly. I've heard. The man turned and walked away. And in that moment, Dean Martin understood something important. Standing up didn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it meant staying calm and refusing to move. And that was exactly what he'd done. The strange thing was what didn't happen next. No calls came in the following days. No bookings vanished. No threats arrived wrapped in polite language. Dean Martin's name stayed right where it had always been, on marquees, on contracts, on tickets sold out weeks in advance. People expected a reaction. Vegas didn't react. And that made everyone more nervous than retaliation ever would have, because silence in that world meant a decision had already been made. Dean felt it the first time he walked back into a casino after that night. The air shifted the moment he crossed the threshold, not hostile, not welcoming, just aware. Men who usually leaned in now leaned back. Conversation stopped when he passed, not out of fear but calculation. People were reassessing something they thought they understood. Dean Martin hadn't challenged power, he had declined it. That unsettled people. A week later, a promoter pulled Dean aside backstage after a show. The man's smile was tight, his voice low.
Just wanted to say, he murmured. You handled that well. Dean smiled faintly. Handled what? The promoter swallowed. You know. Dean nodded. Yeah, I do. The promoter hesitated, then asked the question everyone else was asking privately. You ever wonder why nothing happened? Dean shrugged. I figure if it was going to, it already would have. That wasn't bravado.
It was understanding. Power doesn't like unpredictability. And Dean had introduced something far worse than defiant certainty. The truth was, Dean Martin wasn't reckless. He wasn't naive. He didn't believe himself untouchable. He just understood something most people didn't. Fear works best when you negotiate with it. Dean hadn't negotiated. He'd ended the conversation. Months passed. The story circulated quietly, passed between musicians, dealers, managers, and men who'd learned to listen for subtext. The details changed slightly each time, stories always do, but the core stayed intact. Dean Martin had been offered protection. Dean Martin had said no, and nothing had happened. That final part was the most important. One night, much later, Dean was sitting in his dressing room when an older man he barely knew knocked softly and stepped inside without waiting for an answer. He wasn't flashy, no sharp suit, no entourage, just a man with tired eyes and a voice that carried weight without effort. You don't remember me, the man said. Dean stood, polite. Should I? The man smiled. No, that's the point. He took a seat, uninvited but not unwelcome. I was there that night, the man said. I watched how you handled yourself. Dean nodded. Then you saw enough. The man leaned back. Most people confuse survival with submission. Dean poured 2 drinks without asking and slid one across. I don't, he said. The man accepted the glass. That's why you were left alone. Dean paused. That wasn't mercy. No, the man agreed. It was respect. Dean didn't respond. You didn't insult anyone, the man continued. You didn't threaten. You didn't posture. You didn't pretend you were bigger than the room. He took a sip.
You just made it clear you weren't for sale. The man stood, adjusted his jacket, and looked at Dean carefully. That makes you inconvenient, he said, and inconvenient men aren't worth owning. Then he left. Dean sat alone for a long moment after that. Years later, someone asked him directly, braver than most, what it felt like, standing there, knowing exactly who he was talking to.
Dean thought about it longer than expected. It felt lonely, he said finally. The answer surprised the man. Not scared. Dean shook his head. Scared too, but loneliness hits first. He explained it once quietly to someone he trusted. When you say no to the wrong thing, Dean said, you step out of a crowd, and crowds feel safe until you realize they're the reason you can't breathe. That was Dean Martin in a sentence. People loved to call him cool. Detached, unbothered, but the truth was more complicated. Dean cared deeply about his family, about dignity, about not waking up one day owned by promises he never agreed to make. He didn't need to dominate a room to feel secure. He didn't need to win, he just needed to remain himself. That decision echoed through the rest of his career. You could see it in how he worked. He showed up on time. He treated crew members like equals. He didn't scream, didn't belittle, didn't use power like a weapon. People noticed. You don't throw your weight around, a young performer once told him. Dean smiled.
Why would I? Aren't you afraid people will take advantage? Dean shrugged. If they do, I'll know who they are. That was another thing Dean understood. Knowing someone's character was worth more than controlling their behavior. As the years passed, the story became legend, not because it involved danger, but because of its simplicity. No gunshots, no threats, no dramatic showdown. Just a man who refused to shrink. In private, Dean rarely spoke about it. When he did, he downplayed it. I didn't stand up to anybody, he once said. I just sat down with myself first. But the industry never forgot. Young performers heard it as a warning. Older ones heard it as a lesson they wished they'd learned sooner. Power doesn't always announce itself loudly.
Sometimes it waits to see who bends. Dean never bent. Near the end of his career, someone asked him what advice he'd give to someone entering a world full of pressure, leverage, and invisible strings. Dean leaned back, thoughtful. Figure out what you're willing to lose, he said. Then protect what you won't. That was it. No speech, no sermon, just truth.
When Dean Martin died, people remembered the songs, the films, the effortless charm. But among those who really knew how the world worked, something else stood out. Dean Martin had moved through dangerous rooms without becoming dangerous himself. He had been offered shortcuts and refused them. He had been invited to belong and declined without apology. And that, more than any performance, defined him. Because anyone can raise their voice. Anyone can threaten. Anyone can pretend bravery. But staying calm when power leans in, that takes something rarer. It takes knowing exactly who you are and being unwilling to trade it for comfort. That night in Las Vegas didn't make Dean Martin famous. It made him free.
And in a world built on leverage and fear, that kind of answer really does leave everyone speechless.